Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Fa'a'udhu billahi min shaytanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Sadaqallahu al-azim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Continuing with the next ayah, the next two ayahs together, inshallah, of Surah Yusuf, and this series in which I'm looking at this particular section of Surah Yusuf that deals with quite a few events that are similar, or at least source of guidance for what we are facing in our current situation in the world today. So the next ayah, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قالوا أضغاث أحلام وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين وقال الذي نجا منهما وادكر بعد أمة أنا أنبئكم بتأويله فأرسلون. صدق الله العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in these two ayahs, they said, it is but a mixture of false dreams, and we are not learned in the interpretation of dreams. But the one who was freed and remembered after a time said, I will inform you of its interpretation, so send me forth. So this is happening in straight after the previous ayah, where the king is announcing to his people, those who are his advisors, those who are close, and is advising them, is telling them, is informing them of this dream that he's had, in which he is seeing 7 cows that were well fed and 7 cows that were lean, emaciated. And the lean cows are eating the well-fed cows. So the thin cows are eating the fat cows, and this is perplexing him. Then he sees 7 ears of corn which are green and vibrant, and then 7 that are dried husks. And he wants to know what's happening. So as we mentioned previously, he asks people about this. Now, the first thing he does is ask those who his immediate advisors in his council. They can't tell him. So then he goes further afield, and some of the Mufassirin talk about this, that he goes to the scholars of his kingdom, he goes to the religious people, he even goes to the magicians. So he goes to the different people to find out what could be the meaning of the dream, because it really affects him. And then they all turn up a blank. Nobody seems to know. And then there's one man who's there who is actually not any of the people he's consulted or would ever consult. He's actually the cupbearer. Now, the cupbearer is somebody who is he's a servant to the king. And in this case, this particular person, he was in prison. And he was one of the people that told Yusuf about a particular dream that he had. And in that dream, what happened was that he saw himself crushing grapes. And Yusuf told him that you will be reinstated as a cupbearer of the king, and you will continue to pass on to him drinks as he orders them as his servant. And so that's what happened. So he's called the cupbearer. Now, he's there all the time, and he hears and sees all these things happening. And then he remembers Yusuf al-Islam, because it's been some time now, some years actually, since he came from the prison, and he forgot to mention Yusuf al-Islam to the king to get him freed. So now he remembers him, and he tells the king about him, and he says, look, I know somebody who interprets dreams, so let me go and see him in the prison, arrange for me to go there in a safe manner so that I can speak to him, and I will tell him the dream, and most likely he will know the interpretation. So the king agrees, and so he sends this person to the prison. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So previously, I presented that the king was a good ruler and was concerned about his dream for his people and kingdom. So he knew there was something important in his dream. As I mentioned previously, cows was a sign of providence, of agriculture, and so was the ears of corn. So these two are the main signs or symbols of their growth and their prosperity. So seeing both of them in his dream in a good manner and in a bad manner, it really affected the king, and he wanted to know what it was. He knew it was something to do with the agriculture, something to do with the livestock. Didn't know exactly what it was, though, couldn't figure it out, so he needed somebody to tell him. So he asks one group of people after another, and nobody can tell him. So this was a measure of his goodness, because he could have just thought, okay, leave it, because he was constantly being told by people that, look, it's proving you had something to eat, and it's caused, a mishmash of dreams, and so it's not really anything worth worrying about. But he was concerned, and he didn't want to take that chance over his people. So now I want to focus in this session, inshallah, with these two ayah on the particular people before the king. So we have the advisors to the king, and we have this cupbearer to the king. So the king is going to the advisors, and he's asking them. They're all knowledgeable people in different branches of fields of learning. And so he wants to know what's happening. And so he's asking one group after another, hoping that somebody somewhere will be able to tell him. And in the end, they all draw blank. They're not able to do that. And then, as I mentioned before, the cupbearer, who has been seeing a lot of that, because obviously all these people are invited to the king's palace and were discussing this with the king. The king would reveal the dream to them, and they were unable to come up with anything to tell the king in terms of an interpretation. Finally, the cupbearer says to the king, obviously knowing his position, you see, as a servant, as a slave, he was not going to interrupt, he was not going to say anything on the proceedings. So there's a lot of fear we can imagine that he would have had, that he didn't want to say anything and be maybe a bit presumptuous. So he waited until, and perhaps even himself thought that one or two of the groups will somebody will come along and give an interpretation. But when nobody does, and the king has exhausted all the learned people of his kingdom, then the cupbearer, perhaps in private, speaks to the king and says, well, look, I had this experience in prison, and I know somebody who is really good at interpreting dreams, if you wish. And if that is something that is acceptable to your majesty, can I go and speak to this person on your behalf, and I'll find out and I'll come back to you if he does have the interpretation. So that's the cupbearer and the advisors to the king. So these are the two types of people, and I just want to look a little bit more in detail at both these people and the cupbearer. Okay. So, as mentioned previously, the king had consulted various types of learned people, but none could interpret the dream. So, the advisors now, we can look at them and we can, in hindsight, and try to understand that either they were unwilling or they were unable to interpret the dream. So, which of this it was, we don't know for sure because we're not there. But what we need to understand is that, and inshallah, I'll probably come back to this later on because there's another ayah coming later which will be more concerned with this, but there may have been some dishonesty on the part of these different advisors. Okay, so in any case, they were either unwilling or unable to interpret the dreams. But I want for you to note this. Dreams held an important status in Egypt at that time. Dreams held an important status in Egypt. In fact, if we look at the whole story of Yusuf al-Islam, there's at least 3 dreams that this entire story contains. In fact, the whole of the main story of Yusuf al-Islam is based upon a dream which he has as a child about the sun and the moon and 11 stars all bowing down to him. Then in the prison, this cupbearer has a dream. And another person along with him also has a dream, these 2 prisoners, and they both tell Yusuf al-Islam, and Yusuf al-Islam interprets both their dreams for them. He also interprets other dreams for other people in the prison, but these 2 dreams were significant, so they are mentioned in the Quran. Then, of course, the king has his dream. So that's 4 dreams in one story. So that shows the importance that dreams in that time were something that was very symbolic. People took them very seriously. If they had a dream, they wanted to know what it was about. And as a result of that, there were obviously a lot of people there who were well versed in dream interpretation. It was a popular thing. So it's just like in a technological era that you'd expect a lot of scientists and a lot of engineers, because it reflects the fact that this technological era of a civilization. Same in this case. This civilization, this era they had, was one where they were very superstitious, if you like. They were very concerned with dreams. And this continues even later on, because by the time the King dynasty is done away with and the Pharaohic dynasty comes in, that took some hundreds of years. And as a result of that, what happens is the kingship becomes pharaonic. But the Pharaoh also has a dream, which I mentioned previously, and that dream is also vivid, and he also asks for it to be interpreted, and in his case, it is interpreted that Musa al-Islam will rise and cause his destruction. So, if this was the case, and dreams were interpreted, and people held dreams importantly, obviously a lot of people will be there who are well qualified, well versed in dream interpretation, which is how this also begins. The king has a dream, and he asks his people, if you are dream interpreters, I had this dream, tell me about it. And they draw a blank after that. So, as I said, there's 2 situations there. They were either unwilling to tell him or they were unable to. So, however it is, I'm going to come back to this later because there is something, as I say, in later ayah which also maybe shed some light on this, but I'll come to that a bit later on, inshallah. So, the advisors may have been unwilling. Why unwilling? Because obviously this is a king and it's a dream and they can see you taking it very seriously. If they misinterpret it and give the wrong advice later on, it would literally be their head on the block. So that would be a problem and they wouldn't want to be like that. Or if it wasn't like that, they would lose faith or they would lose trust or they would lose prestige, their positions in front of the king. He would have them dismissed, punished, dismissed, imprisoned, humiliated, any such thing. So they didn't want to do any of that. So they weren't willing to hazard a guess even. And so they just drew a blank, said, we don't know. This is, in fact, they tried to steer the king away from, in fact, even thinking about the dream by saying that, look, this is just a mishmash. This is just probably had something to eat. Don't worry about it. It's nothing to, concern yourself with. Let's carry on. So they wanted to just do away with the whole thing. But the point remains that one of the reasons they may have been unwilling to interpret the dream is to save face and not lose face in front of the king. Another reason may be, and this again will come up later, is that a lot of the people around the king were untrustworthy. They were not good people. So perhaps they may have known but did not wish to reveal because they were content with what may befall the kingdom. Now, we know that later on, the Pharaohic armies came from a neighboring kingdom. Would it be possible that these people were actually in collusion with those people and allowed that takeover to happen? Wallahu alam. We'll discuss this again later on, but I want to leave it at this point just to look at this point, just and slightly scratch the surface as to why the advisors, at a time and a place where dreams are very important, dreams are often being interpreted, dreams are very valued, and there were plenty of people who were skilled in this, why would they all draw a blank for the king? Especially when he goes from one group to another. He goes to scholars, he goes to advisors, he goes to politicians, he goes to magicians, various different groups the Mufassir say he went to, and they all drew a blank. How is that even possible in a land and a time where dreams are important and people were well versed in it? So part of the reason could be that they truly did not know, but part of the reason could also be that they were unwilling because they may have known or could have guessed it, but they were not willing to let the king know because they wanted that destruction to happen. That's a possibility as well. So I'm going to leave that now until later, inshallah. In any case, by dismissing or not wanting to study the dream, they will be ignoring the warnings from Allah Ta'ala. So that is unquestionable. No matter how we want to look at it, whichever of the tafsir we want to look at, whether we look at the tafsir where the Mufassir talk about different types of people and the fact that dreams interpretations were and skilled people were abundant, or whether we want to look at it as simply as they didn't know and that's the end of that. In either case, this was a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we know. We know that now from the interpretation and understanding of the story, let alone the dream. We know what would happen, obviously, because we know the rest of the story, that the famine occurred and Yusuf al-Islam averted it, etc. But we also understand that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings a calamity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often gives warnings. And those warnings we have to take note of. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about warnings in the Quran, that He gives warnings to people. And most people ignore His warnings, His signs. This is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning in various parts of the Quran quite clearly and quite evidently. So, here was a situation. The king has a dream, something's going to happen, they've been given the clue, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them the warning, but the dream interpreters refuse to interpret the dream. I will leave alone the reasons for that now, but whatever the underlying reasons were, the fact of the matter is that this clue, this hint, this warning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being dismissed. And that is the point. Now, the second person or type of person is a cupbearer. Now, the cupbearer was also in front of the king, along with the other interpreters. He now remembers Yusuf al-Islam. And he remembers that Yusuf al-Islam had the ability to interpret dreams. He himself had his own dream interpreted, which came true. He was now the cupbearer to the king. His job was reinstated. Whereas the other person who had a dream, he was put to death. So this man felt he owed a lot to Yusuf al-Islam and respected him. And The only problem was that when Yusuf al-Islam had told him the interpretation of the dream and this man had been released from prison and that dream interpretation fulfilled itself, that he came back to the king and became the cupbearer, Yusuf al-Islam had asked him to mention this to the king, mention Yusuf al-Islam to the king, so that Yusuf al-Islam could be exonerated from the prison, because he was in prison for no reason. He was completely innocent. However, this man forgets, and sometime later, perhaps some years later, when the king has this dream, does he remember about Yusuf al-Islam. So when he remembers him, then he mentions him to the king. Now, this man, the cupbearer, he also displayed concern for his people in wanting to have the dream interpreted. He was a genuine person. He just sincerely, genuinely forgot. And seeing the king concerned, he himself also understood that this dream was very symbolic, very real. Something was happening, something was coming. And having his own experience with Yusuf al-Islam, not just with his own dream, but with the many other dreams which he would have witnessed Yusuf al-Islam interpret people's dreams and avert disasters or plan for them, he understood that this was something important, and he wanted, just like the king, for his people to be saved, to be helped with whatever calamity was coming. So as a result of that, he displayed that concern for his people, and therefore he mentioned to the king about Yusuf al-Islam. So he referred the king and the people to a prophet of Allah Ta'ala as well. That's another thing to understand here. Not only does he refer the king to someone great, someone he respected, but that person he refers the king to is the prophet of Allah Ta'ala at that time. So what is happening here is that two sincere people, the king genuinely wants good for his people, and this cupbearer who has actually had experience of this prophet, signposts the king to that prophet so that he can get his information from the most trusted, reliable, and most pious, most righteous source, Yusuf al-Islam himself. Okay, so now I'll look at what are the lessons for us today, leaving alone now that's a sequence of events in history. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قالوا أضغاث أحلام وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين وقال الذي نجا منهما وادكر بعد أمة أنا أنبئكم بتأويله فأرسلون صدق الله العظيم. Those who did not interpret the king's dream represent most people today who ignore the signs of Allah Ta'ala. So the people that the king went to in that time, if we are looking at what the lessons are we can derive from those events for today, then those people who did not interpret the king's dream or did not tell him what it was or did not help him with it, knowingly or unknowingly, willingly or unwillingly, they represent most of the people today who see the signs of Allah Ta'ala, because ultimately that's what they did, and that's what I said that was the point, ignoring the signs or dismissing the signs of Allah Ta'ala. A lot of people today do exactly the same. They see the signs of Allah Ta'ala, they may experience them, but they ignore them. They continue. And so Allah Ta'ala points this out in the Quran, as I said, in another place Allah Ta'ala says many of the signs of Allah Ta'ala but Allah Ta'ala has given, but most people ignore the signs of Allah Ta'ala. So these people who have done this, now they could be in different categories. They may be from those who are completely ignorant to what is happening, and that's the same today. Those people today who ignore the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they may be just completely ignorant to what is happening. So we see things happening around us, and there are people who think, okay, it's nothing. It's they don't recognize it's anything out of the ordinary. It's just another event. And there will be plenty of events, and the events will continue. This is life. So they are ignorant. They have no recognition. They just continue it, and they're caught in their own worlds, their own problems, their own situations. They have no time to pick up their heads and have a look around what is going on around them in society, in the community, nationally or internationally. There may be also those who believe that this is all part of society's ups and downs. So these are another group of people who see things going wrong, see things happening just as we're experiencing in the world currently, lockdowns or price increases or fuel increases or energy price increases, etc. We see these things, but there is that group of people who, unlike the first group of people who don't see these things or are completely ignorant of these things, just lost in their own lives or completely taken by their own problems, this group of people, they see that there is something happening, but they interpret this as this is part of life. We always have problems. We've grown up having problems. We've had worse situations before, and it will sort itself out. Well, and even if it doesn't, this is life. So they continue side by side with these problems, and again, they do not interpret them in any way at all. So again, this group of people misses out on the signs of Allah Ta'ala, because whatever is happening in society, in the communities, is a sign from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Then there may be those who know something is wrong, but trust the government to resolve it. So that's a group, and they may be those who know something is wrong, but their trust is within the government, within the rulership, the leadership of the day, whether it's into a national scale or international scale. They believe that there'll be always somebody who's there. Our prime minister will help sort it out, our government will sort it out, our king will sort it out, or if it's an international incident, then perhaps the WHO will sort it out, or another large organization, the United Nations, NATO, etc. These people, this big organization, they've always resolved things before, and they'll resolve things now. So these are the people who trust these big organizations, or trust their governments, or trust their leaders, and do not think that there's anything wrong with them, or at least not significantly so, and they are the ones who can put things right. These people have no idea, no clue that it might be those very organizations who are benefiting from what's going on, and who may be the instigators of what's going on. They don't know that. They recognize there are problems. They're not like the first group who are lost in their own problems. They're not like the second group. They do recognize it, and they do know there's a situation here, and there may even be a pattern here. There may even be an increment here of situation getting worse. However, for them, the resolvement of it all is the government, the king, the ruler, the leader, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, NATO, etc. Some governmental rulership body that will deal with all of this, and it's okay. It will be all right. Then finally, there are those who have cognitive dissonance. They know something is wrong. They recognize it's wrong, but they acquiesce anyway. And that perhaps is the worst group, because they're just there. They've understood it. They've worked it out. They realize, yes, something is wrong. It shouldn't be happening like this. This is too much of a coincidence. There seems to be some kind of coordinated planning here. They pick up on all of these things. However, they still acquiesce. In the end, when the push comes to shove, they'll take the medication, they'll take the whatever it is they're given to be injected into their arms, etc. They'll take it all. They'll accept the rulings, they'll accept the guidelines, they'll accept being pushed into corners, and they'll accept their rights, human rights being taken from them for the greater good. They'll accept all this, knowing it's wrong, but they'll acquiesce. Now, whether that's done due to cowardice, or it's done because of lack of resolve or strength or power or belief in their own abilities, wallahu alam, that's a different discussion. Point is, these are people who are aware of what's going on. They are the best of the four groups in the sense of the recognition of what is happening. But having interpreted the events, interpreted the signs, they do nothing. They acquiesce and they still follow, and they know there's something wrong, but they do not feel that they are capable of doing anything to change it. So they acquiesce. So in all four cases, those people who are causing events to happen, those people who are making the plans, those people who are causing the events to unfold one by one or increasing them, get away with it. They get away with it. And the majority of humankind is going to be one of these four groups. Majority of mankind are going to be one of these four groups. They are the most numerous of mankind. And as a result of that, those people who are few, but in rulership, in governance, in organizations, or with the political power or with the financial power, they have the millions or the billions to spend, they're able to get away with it. Despite the fact that at the end of the day, they are an insignificant small number of human beings, and there are millions to billions of human beings on the other side who are suffering from the actions and the planning of these people. They get away with it because the majority of mankind falls into one of these four groups. And yes, they have been manipulated to become like this from various reasons, such as food being contaminated or without nutrition, or damaging and decreasing the intellect, or weakened through social belief systems that cause the men to become weaker, the women being empowered, feminism, toxic masculinity, etc. All these sorts of different things, which are belief systems that are causing society to become weaker, the strong to become weak, and the weak to become strong, but in the wrong sense, in a controlled sense. So therefore, people fall into one of these four groups and become incapable of changing what is happening right in front of their eyes. Now, the cupbearer, what does he represent? The cupbearer represents that those who know the truth are where to find it because they do not trust what they are being told. That's the cupbearer. He understood at that time that Yusuf al-Islam had the truth. Yusuf al-Islam could interpret the dream, and he had this complete faith in that because he himself has experienced what Yusuf al-Islam could do. As a result of that, the cupbearer becomes the one who says to the king that I want to find someone and I can bring that person to you, and that person can help interpret the dream. And this person is representative of today, the kind of person who is not going to accept the narrative that is being portrayed, but is going to do or find his own research and find his own, because his sources are solid. His sources are righteousness. So those people, again, if you look in the previous time in front of the king, the cupbearer was one. The people who were being consulted, the advisors, were various different groups. So in that sense, also in the sense of numbers as well, the people who actually will not trust what they're being told, will research for themselves, will stand up for what they know to be right and correct and just, will be few, and the rest will be many. So the many will be the general folks, and tragically within that, few will be from the ulama. There will be from the ulama as well. So many will be the general folks, and tragically few from the ulama as well will be amongst these people. So this will be the kind of people that will not be the ones who go along with the main narrative. The cupbearer represents such people. So of those types of people, there will be general folks and only a few from the ulama. And that's a tragedy itself. And I say that because obviously it's logical to accept that if there are going to be folks today who are going to recognize something's wrong, who are going to understand it, who are going to go to pious sources, who are going to go to righteous sources, and who are going to work it out for everybody else, it should be logically the ulama, the knowledgeable, the scholars, the learned people. They are people who are not just of learning, they are people of piety. So they should have that. But as I said, the tragedy is that in the day and age we are in today, we find that the kind of people who have actually worked things out, some of them are not even Muslim, but those who are tend to be general folks, right? Youth, etc. People who are on YouTube and people who are using the media. And of the scholars, there'll be very few from the scholars, from the ulama, who are actually speaking out about what is happening and warning the people and understanding what's happening for the people and relaying it to the people. So these people, as a group, as a whole, ulama and the general folks, they will have concern for themselves and also the community. So they will go out there and try to warn other people. They will do appeals, they will do campaigns, they will do awareness events, etc. And they will try to make other people aware of what is going on to, so to speak, wake everybody up. To wake up the people who have been hypnotized, who have been put to sleep, who have been sleepwalking into the traps of what is going on in the world today. So they will seek out true ulama as well for guidance, or if they can't find such, in their absence, they will turn to Allah Ta'ala. That's the true people, those who are awake to what's going on from the Muslims. They will either go to true ulama, those few ulama who are actually speaking out about what's going on and connecting the dots, or if they can't find such people, then they will just turn to Allah Ta'ala and ask for guidance and pray for protection and do what they can within their own capacity to help other people. As for Yusuf al-Islam himself, Yusuf al-Islam, his presence in this story represents the righteous scholars today who are speaking out and advising the people of the fitan that we are facing. That's the representation, if you like, of Yusuf al-Islam from the story of the past, where he was literally there. But in this case, we can look at this and understand that Yusuf al-Islam represents the scholars, the righteous scholars of today who are speaking out and are advising people of the fitan. And that's where his position is. Now, such scholars will have been given the tawfiq by Allah Ta'ala to connect the dots of what is happening around us. They will understand that the lockdowns were not just because of a virus. There must be something else. They will understand that the fact that everyone needs to have this injection is not just for people's protection. They will understand that the force and coercion being used for this cannot be just for care, because there are many illnesses and diseases we've had and still do, including cancer, AIDS, etc. And there was no such coercion to take the medication. In fact, people had a right to dismiss themselves from hospital if they did not want the treatment, despite being ill. Yet all of that was taken away. They will also understand that what is happening now with the fuel prices going up, with the food prices going up, with the sources of energy, whether it's electricity, gas, etc., those going up, energy suppliers putting up prices, they will understand this is not all random, and they will understand that the narrative that is being given by the mainstream media, etc., is not the truth. So, following that, they will also be able to relate such events to the Quran and Hadith as ultimate proof of interpretation of events of unfolding around us. So such scholars, they will be able to point to the Hadith, point to the Quran, and say, well, this ayah or this Hadith shows you that this is now happening, and this is what this Hadith was talking about all along, or this is what this ayah was talking about all along. Here is now the events unfolding in front of our own eyes for you to see that this is what this ayah was talking about, or what this Hadith was talking about. So this is how they will be able to interpret events for people today. And this is where that firasa, that understanding, that illumination of the heart by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, guidance, hidayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His Quran will come to the people, the scholars of today, who are few and far between, but are able to understand this. Finally, although it is good to be enlightened to events around us today, our true salvation is in building our relationship with Allah Ta'ala. It is good to be enlightened. It is good to know what is going on. However, without simplifying it too much, I want to just say that the people who do not understand what's going on does not automatically mean that all of those people are evil or bad or not guided right or are not going to Jannah. None of those things. There will be people, as I just mentioned previously, amongst the people who are awake to what's going on and are able to connect the dots. Many of them are not even Muslim. If they die today, so far as the Sharia is concerned, their akhirah is not going to be good for them, because they still have a lot of other things to do. They still have not affirmed belief in Allah and belief in Allah's Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And without that, there is no good in this life. Without that, there is no good in this life. Nothing is worth anything in this life if we do not affirm the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Risala, the Prophet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, following his sunnah. So, being awake to things is a benefit, is a ni'mah, is a mercy, is a blessing, an extra blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is good to have that. However, there are people who go to the other extreme, having been enlightened. They will then become fixated with eschatology. Eschatology is good, but then so is fiqh, so is sharia, so is tafsir, so is tawheed, so is tajweed, and so on and so on. All things are good. All of Islam is good. But we must not take any one thing out of its context. Albeit, in this day and age, there is this rush to understand the signs of Akhir Zaman, because we are seeing them unfold in front of us, and it's human nature to become excited at this thing. But excitement and excess emotion is not something that Islam allows you to use to overcome or to distract you from the reality, because it's something that Shaitan can use to distract us further and use it against us, take advantage of it. So people become so invested in eschatology that all they are now doing is, in fact, maybe even crossing boundaries and starting to interpret Hadith and Quran themselves, holding, this is non-learned people, non-scholars, holding discussions and debates on chat groups, etc., that this hadith means this ayah means that, this is the interpretation here, this interpretation there. That was wrong. That throws us back to the people and who at least had the honesty to say, we don't know what it means, that the king consulted. And only Yusuf al-Islam was able to interpret, because he was the prophet, he was the one guided. So same today, the scholars who are the inheritors of the prophets must be consulted on matters, and we must be very careful about becoming our own scholars, our own interpreters of events, which is happening so much so. This is very serious, in fact, that the scholars have forbidden this, that no one without knowledge and understanding of matters should ever speak in those matters. And this is very important. So people could be committing a lot of sin. And that's why I say that if those who are not aware, perhaps they may be in a better situation, but the point is that they are not the ones who are all astray. And the people who are aware, not all of them are not even Muslim, and amongst the Muslims, not all of them are righteous. Just because somebody has understood something, and today happens to be the time of eschatology, Akhir Zaman, khair, that's fine. But as I said, it does not take away tafsir, it does not take away the tarbiyah, it does not take away the tazkiyah of the Quran. That has always been and always remains. That has always been and always remains. The purification of the self is a subject, is an issue of development for the Muslim from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam till the last Muslim on earth. And it will always remain that it is upon the basis of our tazkiyah, of the purification of our hearts, that we will reach Jannah or not. And as a result of that, it is our spiritual reflection that will help us in that. It is our spiritual tazkiyah, purification, that will help us to develop a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the basis of true salvation. That is the basis of our true salvation. So we must be very aware of this, that alhamdulillah, it is good to know, it is good to plan, it is good to understand what is going on. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. But we must not forget that the actual purpose of life that we have today is the same as it ever was from the time Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught the first person around him about the deen of Islam. From that point till today, till the last believer on earth, it will always remain that the most important thing is our spiritual purification, our development internally, our sincerity, our character, our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will always remain the key element for our salvation, inshallah. So it is good to know, and it is good to understand the halat we find ourselves in, but we must not forget our purpose in life remains the same, regardless of what situation we're in. The purpose in life for what we are created, the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our devotion to Him, that purpose in life does not change. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that clearly in the Quran, that I did not create insan or jinn for any other purpose but that they should recognize and worship me. That is the touchstone, the cornerstone, the basis of our existence. It does not change. Situations will happen. Worse situations have happened. The Mongol invasion was an incredible destruction of human civilization, but people lived through it. And anybody and everybody who died in their hundreds or thousands will still be asked the same questions in the grave then as will be asked today. It will not change. In fact, the person that the Dajjal will find, and he's a believer, and the Dajjal will cut him into two and then bring him back to life and ask him, am I not your savior now? And that person, he will say, now I know that you are definitely Dajjal because you are meant to do this to me. That person, when he dies, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not ask him about Dajjal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send the angels to his grave and he will still be asked the same three questions as everybody else in the world and everybody else throughout history has been asked from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam till the last day. So we must prepare ourselves for what is the priority. Keep in mind what is happening. Keep in mind trying to understand it. Alhamdulillah. However, we must not run away with it. We must maintain what is the reality, and that's important. So reflection and study of Quran, these sessions, and sessions like this, whoever else is doing them, wherever else you can understand with the Quran, wherever else you can get the tazkiyah of Quran, alhamdulillah. Understand the Quran, get the ta'lim, get the knowledge, get the tarbiyah, the character development, the sincerity, the ikhlas, and get the tazkiyah, because these things will always remain the priority, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand and benefit. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.